Monica, darling, you look, well, as good as possible, all things considered. My mother air-kissed near my cheek, careful not to smudge her Chanel lipstick as she slid the manila folder across my glass desk. I've highlighted my most transferable skills. The administrative assistant position would be perfect, though I'm certainly qualified for something more senior. Before the story continues, write in the comments if your parents loved you. I'd, love to read it. I stared at her. This woman who once told my prom date I was the smart one, obviously not the pretty one, now sitting in my corner office at Luminary Studios with desperation poorly disguised as entitlement. The nameplate on my desk, Monica Reyes, Executive Creative Director, caught the afternoon sun, throwing light directly into her surgically enhanced face. "Let me make sure I understand," I said, keeping my voice level despite the hurricane of emotions threatening to break through. "You want me, the daughter you called unfortunate-looking at my college graduation, to hire you as my assistant?" Her perfectly penciled eyebrows lifted in performative confusion. "Monica, families say all sorts of things. You've always been so sensitive." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "Besides, look how well you turned out. My honest parenting clearly motivated you." I laughed then, a sharp, dangerous sound that made my assistant glance through the glass, wall separating my office from the bustling creative floor. The last time I'd heard from my mother was 3 years ago, when she'd called to tell me my outfit on the 30 Under 30 magazine cover made me look hippie. Before that, it was to inform me that my startup's first major investment round was lucky rather than earned. And now, after the 7-figure acquisition, the profiles in Fast Company and Forbes, after I'd become the person that studio executives and tech CEOs waited weeks to meet with, now I was suddenly worth acknowledging? I picked up her resume with 2 fingers, as though it might contaminate me. "You have no experience in entertainment or technology. But I have excellent taste," she countered, gesturing to her designer outfit. "And I've always had a good eye for what works and what doesn't." The irony of this statement, from a woman who'd spent 2 decades telling me nothing about me worked, seemed entirely lost on her. I set the resume down and folded my hands on the desk, the same pose I used when rejecting overconfident investors or shutting down handsy executives. "Why now, Mom? Why, after 29 years of telling me I wasn't pretty enough, thin enough, or fashionable enough? Are you suddenly interested in being part of my world?" Her smile faltered for a millisecond before recovering. "Family should support each other, Monica. Your father's medical bills wiped out our savings, and I thought, given your success, you'd want to help your mother restart her career." There it was. The truth wrapped in manipulation, served with a side of guilt. I glanced at the mood board wall behind her. Magazine covers featuring my work, photos of celebrities wearing designs from our digital fashion line, screenshots of the virtual environments my team had created for the biggest film franchise of the decade. Each image a testament to what I'd built without a single word of encouragement from the woman who now wanted to ride my coattails. "Give me one good reason," I said quietly. "Why I should help you after you spent my entire life making me feel worthless." For a moment, genuine emotion cracked her perfect mask. Surprise, perhaps, that I wasn't playing along with her revisionist history of our relationship. Then her face hardened into something more familiar. Calculation. "Because I'm your mother," she said simply, as though those 3 words erased everything that had come before. "And because everyone is watching how you handle this." My blood went cold as I followed her slight nod toward the glass wall, where several of my team members quickly pretended they hadn't been observing our interaction. She was right, and she knew it. The compassionate, inspirational leader I'd cultivated in my public image wouldn't coldly reject her own mother, not without damaging the reputation I'd worked so hard to build. I smiled then, the same camera-ready smile I'd perfected for magazine covers and keynote speeches. "You're absolutely right, Mom. Family is family. Her shoulders relaxed as victory settled on her face. Which is why, I continued smoothly, I'm going to help you in a way that truly honors our relationship. I had no intention of letting her into my carefully constructed world. But I also wasn't going to let her leave empty-handed. After all, she'd taught me my most valuable lesson. Sometimes, revenge is a dish best served with a smile. Let me back up a bit. You need to understand exactly what I was protecting from my mother's sudden interest in my success. My name is Monica Reyes, and by current standards, I'm what the media calls a visionary in digital entertainment and virtual fashion. My company, Luminary Studios, creates immersive digital environments and wearable tech that blurs the line between physical and virtual experiences. Our designs have been featured at the Met Gala, worn by A-listers at the Oscars, and integrated into the world's biggest film franchises. But 15 years ago, I was just that awkward Reyes girl, with frizzy hair, severe acne, and clothes that never quite fit right. A fact my mother, Diane, never let me forget. Monica, must you slouch like that? It makes your nose look even bigger. This, as I hunched over AP Calculus homework at 14, if you'd just let me straighten your hair and put you on my diet, you might actually get asked to prom. This, while I was being awarded a National Science Prize at 16. Well, MIT is a good choice for someone with your limitations. At least you'll be among your kind there. This, as I packed for college with a full scholarship. Every milestone, every achievement in my young life came with my mother's subtle, or not-so-subtle reminder that my value was diminished by my appearance. That no matter what I accomplished, I would always be fundamentally deficient as a woman. My father, Robert, was largely absent, first physically as he built his accounting practice, then emotionally as he retreated into alcoholism when that practice failed. When he occasionally surfaced from his vodka haze, his defense of me was tepid at best. "Diane, ease up on the girl," he'd mutter. Then, inevitably, "She's just trying to help you, Monica. Your mother knows how the world works." And perhaps she did. The world can be brutally unforgiving to women who don't meet conventional beauty standards. But rather than arming me with confidence to face that reality, my mother seemed determined to break me down so completely that I'd never question her assessment of my worth. By the time I reached MIT, I was a paradox. Academically brilliant, but emotionally fractured, driven to succeed yet convinced I was inherently flawed. I chose computer science and design, not just because I loved it, but because it allowed me to create worlds where appearance didn't define value. My virtual environments and digital fashion designs began as a graduate thesis, wearable technology that could transform physical appearance through augmented reality. Why conform to beauty standards when technology could reshape how we present ourselves to the world? What started as academic research evolved when I recognized its commercial potential. I maxed out 3 credit cards, took a predatory startup loan, and lived in a converted storage unit to launch Luminary's first prototype. The early years were brutal. Venture capitalists, mostly men with a narrow view of both beauty and vision, either hit on me or dismissed me. One particularly memorable rejection came with the suggestion that I find a male co-founder, preferably an attractive one, to be the face of the company. But then came our breakthrough, a digital overlay that could transform any garment into an interactive canvas, responding to environment, emotion, and social context. Paired with our immersive spatial design, it created experiences that transcended physical limitations. When celebrity stylist Jamie Chen discovered our technology at a guerrilla showcase we'd set up outside New York Fashion Week, everything changed. Within 6 months, our designs appeared on a Grammy-winning artist during a performance watched by millions. Within a year, we secured $12 million in funding. Within 2, we were collaborating with major studios to create immersive storytelling environments. Success followed success. Awards accumulated. My awkward teenage self would never have imagined seeing her name on most influential lists or her face on magazine covers. Covers my PR team carefully negotiated to ensure the photos would be authentic rather than overly airbrushed. Throughout this meteoric rise, my mother remained conspicuously absent. No congratulatory calls, no proud social media posts, nothing but occasional critical commentary delivered through sporadic phone calls. When I was named to Forbes 30 Under 30, she called to ask why I hadn't done something about my eyebrows for the photo shoot. When Luminary won the South by Southwest Innovation Award, she sent a text wondering if my acceptance speech outfit was meant to be ironic. When we announced the studio acquisition that made me a millionaire many times over, her only response was to ask if I was dating anyone yet. Because money can compensate for a lot, but you shouldn't wait too long to settle down. I stopped sharing my achievements, stopped seeking her approval, stopped expecting anything resembling maternal pride. Then came my father's heart attack, severe enough to require bypass surgery, complicated enough to result in a lengthy hospital stay and mountains of debt. I sent money immediately when my aunt called to tell me, covering all the medical expenses without hesitation, not for my mother's sake, but because despite everything, my father had at least occasionally tried to shield me from the worst of her criticism. I expected a thank you note. Perhaps a brief, reluctant phone call. I did not expect my mother to show up at my office. Designer handbag containing a resume and an entirely fictional version of our family history. "I'd like to help you, Mom." "I really would," I said, watching her face carefully. "But I don't think working directly with me is the right fit." Her smile tightened. "I'm extremely adaptable, Monica. I'm sure I could handle whatever responsibilities you need covered." "It's not about your capabilities," I replied smoothly. "It's about finding the right opportunity for your specific talents." I opened my laptop and made a show of checking my calendar. "As it happens, I'm having dinner tonight with Sadie Williams. She runs HR for Bellworth Media. They're always looking for experienced administrative professionals for their suburban offices." The flash of disappointment in my mother's eyes was unmistakable. Bellworth Media was respectable but decidedly unglamorous, a far cry from Luminary's cutting-edge reputation and Manhattan headquarters. "That's very thoughtful," she said, unable to hide her dissatisfaction. "Though I was hoping for something more central to your operation, where I could really contribute to your vision." I had to admire her persistence and her audacity. "Let me think." I tapped my chin thoughtfully. "There's also a customer service position at our tech support center in Newark. The hours are a bit challenging, overnight shift, but it would definitely be part of our organization." My mother's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "Monica, I think my skills would be wasted in customer service. Surely there's something more suitable here, where we could work together. Perhaps in a development or advisory capacity." I leaned forward, maintaining my helpful expression while delivering the killing blow. "But Mom, you've always said you don't understand what I do. In fact, I distinctly remember you calling my early designs computer nonsense that nobody wants when I first showed them to you at Christmas 6 years ago." Her face flushed. That was before I fully appreciated the scope of your vision. Before I was successful, you mean," I corrected gently. "Before there was any advantage to being associated with me." The pretense of maternal warmth dropped entirely from her face. "I see. So you're punishing me now that you have some power, is that it? Using your position to settle old scores?" I smiled, not my magazine cover smile, but a genuine one. "No, Mom. I'm simply acknowledging our actual relationship rather than the fictional one you walked in with. You've made it abundantly clear throughout my life that you find me disappointing. Why would I bring that energy into a workplace I've carefully crafted to be supportive and affirming?" She gathered her designer handbag, face tight with anger. I should have known you'd be petty about this. You always were overly sensitive. I prefer to think of it as self-aware, I said, remaining seated as she stood. But I meant what I said about helping you. The Bellworth position is real, and I'm happy to make a call. They offer excellent benefits. Don't bother, she snapped, moving toward the door. I'll manage without your condescending charity. I nodded. You always have before. That's something we have in common, at least. Her hand froze on the doorknob. What is that supposed to mean? It means we're both survivors, Mom. You taught me that, if nothing else. How to persist despite criticism. How to build my own confidence when none was offered at home. In a way, I owe my success partly to you, just not in the way you might think. Something flickered across her face. Anger, certainly, but perhaps a flash of something else. Recognition? Regret? It vanished too quickly to identify. Goodbye, Monica, she said stiffly. I hope your success keeps you warm at night. As the door closed behind her, my assistant Maya appeared with a concerned expression. Everything okay? That looked intense. I sighed, the perfect posture I'd maintained throughout my mother's visit finally relaxing. Family drama, nothing unusual. Maya nodded sympathetically. Your 3 o'clock is here. The Marvel producers? Give me 5 minutes, then send them in. As Maya left, I turned to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, allowing myself a moment to process what had just happened. I should have felt triumphant. I'd stood my ground, maintained boundaries, refused to be manipulated. So why? Did I feel hollow? Perhaps because despite everything, some childish part of me had hoped that my mother's visit signaled genuine recognition of my accomplishments. That beneath the transparent self-interest, there might be a shred of actual pride in what I'd built. But there wasn't. There was only opportunism dressed as maternal connection, the same emotional vampirism that had defined our relationship for 29 years. I straightened my custom-designed jacket, activated the subtle LED elements woven into the fabric to shift its color pattern to something more vibrant, and prepared to meet with producers who valued my vision enough to pay millions for it. I didn't need my mother's approval. I never had. But, as I greeted the Marvel team with my professional smile firmly in place, I couldn't quite shake the nagging sense that I'd just closed a door that perhaps should have remained cracked open. 2 weeks passed with no contact from my mother. I threw myself into work, finalizing designs for a breakthrough project that would integrate our technology into live theatrical performances. The concepts were revolutionary, allowing members to experience personalized versions of the production through wearable, augmented reality. I was reviewing the prototype when Maya buzzed my office intercom. Monica, there's a Robert Reyes here to see you. Says he's your father. My hand froze over the design tablet. My father had never visited my office, had never, to my knowledge, shown any interest in my professional world beyond cashing the checks. I sent for his medical bills. Send him in, I said after a moment's hesitation. The man who entered barely resembled the father I remembered. Robert Reyes had once been imposing, tall, broad-shouldered, with a commanding presence that filled rooms. The figure who shuffled into my office seemed diminished, hollowed out by illness and age, his once dark hair now sparse and gray. Monica, he said, his voice stronger than his appearance suggested. This is quite a place you've built. Dad, I replied, standing awkwardly behind my desk. This is unexpected. Is everything okay? The doctors? He waved away my concern. Doctors are fine. Heart's as good as can be expected. He gestured vaguely at his chest, where I knew a dramatic scar now marked the bypass surgery. May I sit? Of course. I indicated the chair my mother had occupied 2 weeks earlier, unsure what to expect from this unprecedented visit. My father settled into the chair with a slight wince, then looked around my office with undisguised curiosity. His gaze lingered on the awards displayed on a floating shelf, the framed magazine, covers, the prototype designs visible on multiple screens. "I should have done this sooner," he said finally. "Come to see all this, what you've created." "You've been recovering," I offered, uncomfortable with the unfamiliar territory of a personal conversation with my father. Our interactions had always been superficial, infrequent, and usually overshadowed by my mother's dominant presence. "Recovering for 3 years?" He shook his head. "No, that's not it. Truth is, I didn't understand what you were doing. Still don't, not really. But it's impressive, clearly. Even an old dinosaur like me can see that." I waited, sensing there was more coming. "Your mother told me about her visit," he continued. "Said you were cold, unfeeling, refused to help family in need." Of course she had. Did she mention the part where she spent my entire life undermining my confidence and criticizing my appearance? My father sighed heavily. "She has her ways. Not always kind, I know that. I should have intervened more." The understatement was so enormous I almost laughed. "Intervened more? Dad, you were barely present. When you were, you told me to essentially suck it up and accept her help." "I was wrong," he said simply. The straightforward admission caught me off guard. My father had never, to my recollection, acknowledged being wrong about anything. "I was a coward," he continued. "It was easier to let her be her than to confront what she was doing. To you, to our family. And then, when my business troubles started, when the drinking got bad," he trailed off, staring at his hands. "Well, I failed you. That's the plain truth." I sat perfectly still, absorbing words I'd never expected to hear. "I'm not here about the job," he clarified, "though God knows she needs one. Pride won't pay the mortgage." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I'm here because nearly dying has a way of clarifying things, and I realized I don't want to go to my grave having never told my daughter that I see her, really see her, and that I'm sorry." The sincerity in his voice pierced through layers of protection I'd built over decades. I swallowed hard, fighting back unexpected emotion. "Why now?" I asked, the same question I'd posed to my mother, but with none of the defensive anger. "What's changed?" Besides the massive scar down my chest? His attempt at humor fell flat, and he sighed again. "When you're lying in a hospital bed thinking, you might not wake up from surgery, you get clarity about what matters. I saw all those machines keeping me alive. Technology I don't understand but am damn grateful for. And I thought about you. About how you've always been drawn to creating things beyond my comprehension." He gestured around my office. "This world you've built, this vision you've pursued despite every discouragement. I want to understand it, Monica, before it's too late. I want to understand you." The raw honesty in his voice broke something open inside me, a door I'd sealed. Shut long ago, marked parental approval, unnecessary. "It's complicated technology," I said, searching his face for signs of insincerity or manipulation. "But the concept is simple. I create experiences that transcend physical limitations, ways for people to express themselves beyond the bodies they were born with." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Because you grew up feeling limited by how people, how we, saw you." I nodded, surprised by his perceptiveness. "Exactly. In my virtual environments, wearing my designs, people aren't judged by conventional standards. They're free to be seen for who they truly are, not just how they appear." "Show me," he said simply. I hesitated only briefly before unlocking a drawer and removing one of our prototype headsets. "This is still in development, but it will give you the basic idea." As I fitted the sleek device over his eyes, I activated our demo environment from my tablet. My father's breath caught as the full sensory experience engaged, a digital landscape where physical form became fluid, where identity was expressed through color, movement, and energy rather than rigid biological constructs. For 3 minutes, he experienced the world I'd created, a world where the arbitrary judgments that had defined my childhood simply didn't exist. When I removed the headset, his eyes were damp. "That's revolutionary," he said quietly. "And beautiful, like nothing I've ever experienced." "That's just the beginning," I replied, unable to keep the pride from my voice. "We're developing applications for everything from entertainment to medical therapy for body dysmorphia." My father shook his head in wonder. "And to think, all those years your mother worried about your appearance, when your mind was capable of this." He gestured helplessly at the headset. What a waste of energy that was. The simple acknowledgement that my mother's fixation had been misguided rather than helpful loosened a knot of tension I'd carried for decades. "She's not a bad person, you know," he said after a moment. "Just frightened. The world rewarded her beauty for so long she doesn't know how to exist without it. And now that age is taking that away?" "Don't make excuses for her," I said, more sharply than intended. "Being afraid doesn't justify cruelty." "No, it doesn't," he agreed. "I'm not excusing it. Just trying to understand it. The same way I'm trying to understand you now." He hesitated. Better late than never? The question hung between us, tentative and hopeful. I studied this man who had been a shadow in my life, present but insubstantial, never fully engaged with who I was or what I needed. Now he was here, asking for something I'd stopped believing was possible. A real connection. "I don't." "No," I answered honestly. "Maybe. It depends on what happens next." He nodded, accepting the uncertainty. "Fair enough. I've given you no reason to trust my intentions." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small, wrapped package. "I brought this. Not as a bribe or manipulation. Just something I thought you should have." I took the package cautiously and unwrapped it to find a worn leather journal. Opening it revealed my mother's handwriting, but not the sharp, critical voice I knew. These were softer reflections, dating back to before my birth. "Your mother's diary from when she was pregnant with you," my father explained. "I found it while organizing some old boxes. She doesn't know I have it, or that I've brought it to you." I skimmed a page, startled by the hopeful tone. The baby kicked so much today, already so active and strong. I hope she has my mother's artistic talent and Robert's analytical mind. I dream about who she'll become, this little person growing inside me. I want to give her everything I never had: confidence, opportunity, unconditional support. I closed the journal, unsettled by this glimpse of a mother I'd never known, one who had dreamed of supporting rather than criticizing me. "What happened?" I asked. "Between these words and everything that came after?" My father's expression turned pained. "Many things. Postpartum depression that went untreated. Her modeling career ending sooner than she'd hoped. Financial pressures." He sighed. "And her own mother's voice in her head, criticizing everything from her parenting to her body. The same voice she eventually turned on you. Cycles of damage," I murmured, thinking of all the research I'd read while trying to understand my own fractured relationship with my body and self-worth. "Cycles that can be broken," my father replied. "If we're brave enough. I'm trying to be brave now, Monica. Better late than never." The phrase echoed between us again, less uncertain this time. I touched the journal thoughtfully. "I'll read this. I can't promise it will change anything, but I'll read it. That's all I ask." He stood with visible effort. "Thank you for seeing me, for showing me your work." He gestured at the prototype headset. "It's extraordinary. You're extraordinary. And I'm sorry I didn't tell you that every day of your life." As he turned to leave, I made a quick decision. "Dad?" He paused at the door. I'm keynoting the Digital Futures Conference next month, in Boston. If you're feeling up to it, you could come, both of you, if... I trailed off, unsure how to frame the complicated invitation. A smile softened his weathered face. I'd be honored. As for your mother, I'll work on her. No promises, but I'll try. After he left, I sat holding the journal, turning it over in my hands. The history it contained wouldn't erase the pain of my childhood. Reading it wouldn't magically heal the wounds my mother had inflicted. But perhaps it offered something else. Context. Understanding. The beginning of a new narrative that, while not excusing the past, might help shape a different future. I placed the journal in my bag and returned to my designs, to the world I'd created where appearance didn't determine worth. A world born from my pain but not defined by it. A world that might, just possibly, have room for reconciliation alongside revolution. The Digital Futures Conference was the premier event in our industry, held in Boston's Heinz Convention Center, with over 5,000 attendees. My keynote, Beyond the Physical, Identity in Digital Spaces, would unveil Luminary's most ambitious technology yet. I was reviewing my presentation in the green room when Maya appeared. "They're here," she said quietly. "Your parents. In the reserved section, front row." My stomach tightened. Despite the tentative invitation, I hadn't truly expected my mother to come. My father, perhaps, but not her. "Both of them?" I confirmed. Maya nodded. "Your father looks proud. Your mother looks... nervous." Nervous. Not a word I'd ever associated with my supremely confident, borderline narcissistic mother. "Thanks for letting me know," I said, turning back to my notes, though the words now blurred before my eyes. I'd read her journal in the week since my father's visit. Page after page revealing a younger, more vulnerable Diane Reyes, a woman determined to give her daughter a different experience than her own brutal upbringing, yet ultimately repeating the same patterns despite her intentions. It hadn't erased the hurt, but it had complicated my understanding of who she was and why she'd become that way. 5 minutes, Ms. Reyes," a production assistant called through the door. I stood, adjusting the custom-designed outfit I'd created, specifically for this moment, a dress that appeared conventionally elegant at first glance, but transformed as I moved, revealing embedded technology that responded to my voice, gestures, and emotional state. The ultimate expression of Luminary's vision, technology that enhanced rather than replaced human expression. As I approached the stage, I could see my parents in the front row. My father, looking healthier than during his office visit, smiled, encouragingly. Beside him, my mother sat rigid with tension, her expression unreadable. I took a deep breath and walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause. "Transformation," I began, my voice steady despite the emotional turbulence beneath. "It's a concept central to human experience. We transform constantly, from child to adult, from student to professional, from stranger to friend to family." The bows, lights dimmed slightly as I moved across the stage, my dress beginning to shimmer with subtle patterns that matched the cadence of my speech. But transformation has always been constrained by physical reality, by bodies that age, by faces that change, by appearances that are judged according to arbitrary and often cruel standards. My gaze flickered briefly to my mother, whose attention was fixed on me with an intensity I'd never seen before. Not critical, but almost hungry, absorbing every word. At Luminary Studios, we're breaking those constraints, creating spaces where transformation isn't limited by biology or convention, where identity becomes fluid, authentic, and self-determined rather than imposed. As I explained the technology, the dress responded, shifting colors, textures, and even apparent structure as I moved. The audience gasped when what had appeared to be solid fabric transformed into something resembling liquid light, then crystallized into entirely new patterns. "This isn't about escaping reality," I continued. "It's about expanding it, about creating spaces where we're seen for who we truly are, not just how we appear." For the next 30 minutes, I outlined Luminary's vision, demonstrated our newest innovations, and shared case studies of how our technology was already changing lives, from theatrical experiences to medical applications for those with body, image disorders. Throughout, I was acutely aware of my mother watching, her expression gradually shifting from tense concentration to something less guarded. Not quite pride, but perhaps recognition. I created these technologies because I know firsthand how limiting it can be when your external appearance becomes the primary lens through which the world, and sometimes those closest to you, judges your worth, I said, nearing my conclusion. The room quieted, sensing the personal turn. I grew up believing I was fundamentally flawed, that my appearance would always overshadow my abilities, that no achievement could outweigh the liability of not meeting conventional beauty standards. My dress shifted again, briefly displaying what appeared to be fragments of mirrors, before resolving into a pattern that seemed to radiate light from within. What I've learned is that transformation isn't about becoming someone else. It's about revealing who you truly are beneath the limitations others impose. About creating spaces, virtual and real, where authentic self-expression isn't just possible but celebrated. I looked directly at my mother for the first time. Sometimes the people who should see us most clearly are the ones who see us least. Sometimes the voices that shape us most powerfully are the ones that speak from their own unhealed wounds. Her eyes widened slightly, recognizing herself in my words. But like the technologies I've shown you today, human connections can also transform, can evolve beyond their initial programming, can become something new, something better, if we're brave enough to imagine different possibilities. The audience rose in a standing ovation as I concluded, the dress now radiating patterns that seemed to connect with the theater's lighting, creating an immersive experience that extended beyond my physical form to encompass the entire space. Through the applause, I kept my eyes on my parents. My father was openly emotional, clapping with undisguised pride. My mother remained seated, her reaction hidden as she looked down at her hands. After answering questions and accepting congratulations from industry leaders eager to explore partnerships, I finally made my way to where my parents waited in a quiet corner of the reception area. "That was extraordinary," my father said, embracing me awkwardly but sincerely. "I understood maybe half of the technical details, but the vision, your vision, it's remarkable, Monica." "Thank you," I said, surprised by how much his approval still meant despite decades of learning to live without it. I turned to my mother, bracing for criticism disguised as commentary. What shape would it take this time? My delivery? My appearance? The ambition of the concepts I'd presented? "You had so many people listening to you," she said finally, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. "All those important people, hanging on your every word. Not criticism, but observation." Still, I tensed, waiting for the barb that would inevitably follow. Instead, she reached out hesitantly and touched the fabric of my dress, the revolutionary garment I'd designed that had transformed throughout my presentation. "Did you make this?" "Yes," I replied cautiously. "It's one of our new prototypes, responsive fabric embedded with adaptive technology." She nodded slowly, her fingers lingering on the material. "It's beautiful." Then, almost inaudibly, "You're beautiful." 3 decades of waiting for those words. 3 decades of knowing they shouldn't matter, that my worth wasn't determined by her assessment of my appearance, and yet feeling them land with seismic impact. "Mom," I started, unsure what would follow. "I read your interviews," she interrupted. "All of them. I watched your previous talks online." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. You never mention me, or your father. It's like you emerged fully formed from nothing. It wasn't an accusation, more a recognition of a deliberate absence. Would you have preferred I shared how you told me I was too ugly to succeed? I asked quietly. How you undermined every achievement by reminding me of my physical limitations. She flinched. No, of course not. She hesitated. Your father gave you my journal. I nodded. Then you know I wanted different for you. Better. Her perfectly maintained composure cracked slightly. I failed at that, spectacularly. Yes, I agreed, not softening the truth. You did. My father shifted uncomfortably beside us, but didn't interrupt the exchange 30 years in the making. I can't change that, my mother continued. But watching you today, seeing what you've created, how you've helped people transform how they see themselves. She gestured vaguely at the conference around us. Maybe it's not too late for me to transform too, to learn to see differently. It wasn't an apology exactly. But from a woman who had never acknowledged fault in anything, it was seismic, the phi. Job, I began cautiously. She shook her head. I didn't come for a job, though I won't pretend we don't need the money. A flash of her old pride surfaced. I came because your father insisted, because he said I owed it to you to see what you've built. And he was right. She looked around at the conference, at the people still lingering nearby hoping to speak with me. I didn't understand before. What you were creating. I thought it was just computer games or something frivolous. It's never been frivolous, I said quietly. It's about giving people the freedom I never had. The freedom to be seen for who they are, not how they look. My mother winced slightly at the implicit accusation. I see that now. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Your presentation, the way you talked about transformation, it made me think about my own mother. This was unexpected territory. My maternal grandmother had died before I was born, and she was rarely mentioned in our household, except as a vague specter of disapproval that my mother seemed simultaneously to fear and channel. She was brutal about appearances, my mother continued. Nothing was ever good enough. My hair, my weight, my clothes. Even when I was modeling, when my appearance was literally paying our bills, she found flaws. She laughed bitterly. I swore I'd never be like her. And then, you became exactly like her, I finished. She nodded, not denying it. I told myself I was preparing you for a harsh world, that I was being realistic, not cruel. Her voice dropped. I was wrong. Coming from a woman who had never admitted being wrong about anything, these words carried the weight of transformation themselves. I don't expect forgiveness, she added quickly, or a relationship, or anything really. I just wanted you to know that I see it now, the damage, and I'm sorry. The apology hung between us, unexpected and incomplete, but undeniably real. Thought about the journal I'd read, about the frightened young woman who had wanted to protect her daughter from the same wounds she'd suffered, but had instead transmitted them with devastating precision. About cycles of damage and the courage it takes to break them. I don't know what happens next, I said honestly. I've spent my adult life building walls against your criticism. I'm not sure I know how to exist with you without those walls. That's fair, she said, surprising me again with her acceptance. Maybe nothing happens next. Maybe this is just acknowledgement, recognition of what was and what might have been. My father, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke. Or maybe it's a beginning, a different kind of beginning than we imagined 29 years ago, but a beginning nonetheless. I studied my mother's face, the familiar features that had loomed over my childhood with expressions of disappointment and criticism. Now I saw something new there. Uncertainty, vulnerability. openness to possibilities she hadn't previously allowed herself to consider. Maybe, I conceded. Not a job at Luminary. That wouldn't be healthy for either of us. No, my mother agreed quickly. That was presumptuous of me. But perhaps dinner, occasionally. Phone calls that don't end with me feeling diminished. I shrugged, trying to appear more casual than I felt about this tentative olive branch. We could try that and see where it leads. Hope flickered across my mother's face, subtle but unmistakable. I'd like that. I'm not promising a Hollywood reconciliation, I warned. Or that I'll ever fully trust your assessment of me. Too much damage has been done for that. I understand, she said, and for perhaps the first time in our relationship, I believed she actually did. An awkward silence fell. 3 decades of dysfunction impossible to resolve in a single conversation. Your dress really is extraordinary, my mother said finally, returning to safer ground. The way it changes, responds to you. It's like nothing I've ever seen. That's the point, I replied. Creating what hasn't existed before, expanding possibilities, rather than limiting them. She nodded, absorbing this. You've always been capable of seeing beyond limitations, even as a child. I should have recognized that as strength instead of trying to force you into conventional thinking. Before I could respond, Maya approached discreetly. Sorry to interrupt, but the MIT team is waiting for their meeting, and the Forbes reporter has been holding for 20 minutes. I need to go, I said, almost relieved by the professional demands pulling me back to familiar territory. Of course, my father said. You have important work to do. My mother nodded agreement, then hesitated before adding, Thank you for allowing us to be here today, for not erasing us completely from your narrative, even though you had every right to. The acknowledgement of my power in this dynamic, my authority to include or exclude them from my success story, represented perhaps the most profound shift in our relationship. For the first time, my mother was recognizing me not as the flawed daughter who needed her critical guidance, but as an accomplished woman with the agency to define her own story. I'll be in Boston until Sunday, I said, making a spontaneous decision. If you're free tomorrow evening, maybe we could have dinner. Just the 3 of us. No expectations or grand reconciliations. Just conversation. The invitation hung in the air between us. Not quite forgiveness, but perhaps the seed from which something new might grow. We'd like that, my father answered, a cautious smile lighting his tired face. My mother simply nodded, emotion rendering her uncharacteristically wordless. As I walked away to my next meeting, I felt lighter somehow. Not because all was forgiven or forgotten, it wasn't, and might never be. Not because I needed their approval, I had long since learned to thrive without it. But because in choosing to open even a small door to possibility, I was exercising the very freedom I had built my company to provide. The freedom to transform beyond old limitations. The freedom to redefine relationships on my own terms. My dress shifted subtly as I moved, responding to my emotional state with patterns that seemed to radiate from within, not unlike the cautious hope beginning to unfurl inside me. Tomorrow's dinner would be awkward, halting, filled with landmines of unresolved history. Perhaps nothing would come of it beyond a single meal shared between 3 damaged people attempting to see each other clearly for the first time. Or perhaps it would be the first tentative step toward something new, not the unconditional mother-daughter bond I had once desperately craved, but a more measured adult relationship built on honesty rather than obligation. Either way, the choice was mine. Not a choice driven by childhood neediness or adult resentment, but by the confident woman I had become despite, or perhaps because of, everything that had come before. As I greeted the MIT research team waiting to discuss a groundbreaking collaboration, I caught a glimpse of my parents leaving the conference hall, my father's supportive hand on my mother's back, her head bent in what appeared to be thoughtful reflection. They were no longer the towering figures of my childhood, capable of crushing my self-worth with a casual comment or dismissive glance. They were simply people, flawed, complex, and potentially capable of change. And I was no longer the ugly duckling desperate for their approval. I had built my own world where conventional standards of beauty had no power, where transformation was not just possible but celebrated, where the limitations of the past need not determine the possibilities of the future. Whatever happened next, reconciliation, rejection, or something in between, I would face it not as the daughter seeking validation, but as the woman who had transformed pain into purpose, the woman who had built technology to free others from the same prisons that had once confined her, the woman who had learned that true beauty isn't found in physical features, but in the courage to define yourself on your own terms, regardless of who does or doesn't see your worth. That woman needed neither her mother's validation nor her vengeance. She simply needed to continue becoming more fully herself. And in that becoming, that constant, courageous transformation, lay the most powerful response to every critic who had ever tried to diminish her, starting with the one who had known exactly where to aim the most devastating blows. Not at her appearance, which had always been the least interesting thing about her, but at her belief that she deserved to be seen, heard, and valued, exactly as she was. That belief, once shattered, had been painstakingly reconstructed through years of determination, creation, and the gradual recognition that the voices telling us we're not enough rarely have anything to do with our actual worth. As I prepared to unveil Luminary's next breakthrough to the MIT team, I silently thanked the critics, my mother chief among them, who had inadvertently fueled the revolution I was now leading. A revolution not of vengeance, but of vision. Not of rejection, but of expansion. A revolution built on the radical premise that everyone deserves to be seen for who they truly are, not just how they appear. Even mothers who failed their daughters. Even daughters who had to save themselves.